The message is clear, that technology can improve your life, that if you buy the latest tech gadget, you will be a better person. But is it so? What if technology is not the answer all the time? What if digital tools fail to live up to their grandiose promises? Kentaro Toyama examines these questions in his talk, Debunking Myths About Technology's Impact on Society.
In January of 2011, the world watched as millions of people took to the streets in Egypt to protest their government. Time magazine asked, "Is Egypt about to have a Facebook revolution?" And they asked that question because at the time, people organized these protests on various kinds of social media, whether it was Twitter or Facebook or otherwise. That event marked a new chapter for the Arab Spring, and it cemented this idea that social media could play a significant role in democratization. The idea was taken so seriously that Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, instituted a foreign policy called Internet freedom. She said that information networks help citizens hold their governments accountable. But does social media really help cause political change? There are actually plenty of reasons to doubt. For example, soon after the Egyptian revolution, in Saudi Arabia, many protesters tried to organize what they called a Day of Rage online. But those protests ultimately never materialized in the physical world. Soon after protests showed up at their sites, police force materialized to shut them down. In fact, the international media hardly even noticed, which is why we never heard about an attempted revolution in Saudi Arabia. And that's because, unlike in Egypt, where there were thriving civil society organizations like labor unions, student groups, and religious organizations, in Saudi Arabia, the monarchy has squashed any attempt to organize. In Syria, protests also began around the same time, and their leader, Bashar al-Assad, ultimately decided that he didn't want a revolution in his own country, so he shut down the internet in most of Syria. But the rebels kept fighting, and in fact, we are now in the third or fourth year of a long-term civil war in Syria, which suggests that you don't need the internet to fight against an oppressive government. These two cases show that technology is actually neither necessary nor sufficient to cause a revolution. And in fact, that's something that we ought to know from our own history. So in the United States, of course, we've had an American Revolution, and that was at a time when, of course, there was no internet, no telegraph, no telephone, and not even really electricity. And yet people managed to find the means to protest. They organized through word of mouth and through pamphlets. In fact, I always say that if we're going to call the Egyptian revolution a Facebook revolution, we ought to be prepared to call the American Revolution a lantern revolution because of Paul Revere and one if by land, two if by sea. I study technology's role in social change. My interest in this area came when in 2004 I moved to India to help Microsoft start a new research lab there. Our goals as a group were to find different ways in which we could use personal computers, mobile phones, digital cameras, and other kinds of electronic devices to address the problems of healthcare, education, governance, microfinance, agriculture, and so on, particularly for the poorer communities of the world. We used methods of contextual inquiry, usability evaluations, and impact evaluations to see that our projects actually had ultimate impact. And we found that, at least as research projects, they would often succeed. So for example, in one of our projects, we developed text-free user interfaces so that people who were illiterate would be able to navigate computer user interfaces. We worked with women from Bangalore area slums, and they were primarily interested in looking for jobs as informal workers in the homes of middle-class families. Our idea was that we would set up a kiosk where potential employees could browse the site and find jobs in a database that were logged by employers. The user interface ultimately worked. Our text-free designs allowed people who were illiterate to navigate those jobs. But what we found in taking this project forward was that the technology was overwhelmed by challenges of marketing the system to potential employers, and then in many cases getting sufficient training for the employees so that they could do the jobs that the employers wanted. In fact, these larger concerns of training and marketing were so large that they overwhelmed the value of the technology. We found that no matter how good the database was or how good the user interface was, that it ultimately didn't have that much impact in helping these women get the jobs that they wanted. Over the 5 years that I was in India, I saw this kind of situation over and over again, whether our projects had to do with agriculture or education or something else. So for example, in a mobile phone project where we helped sugarcane cooperatives communicate with their farmers, we found that an internal political rivalry within the institution ultimately prevented the project from going forward. In education, we found that software that we would write to help teachers teach to their children was not being used because teachers ultimately had real difficulty integrating the technology into their curricula. And in projects that we worked on with healthcare, what we found was that the trust that patients had with their health workers was far more important than, let's say, the nature of the content that they browse on a mobile phone device. All of this is to say that in many of these cases, technology, even when it was well designed and tested well in research projects, ultimately didn't have much of an impact because of the challenges with institutions and with human capacity. So how can we explain this? In our own lives, technology has incredible amounts of power. For myself, for my colleagues, for our students, for most of you watching this, technology allows us to do amazing things. It allows us to be more productive in our work, it allows us to do daily chores more efficiently, and it allows us to keep in touch with friends and families in a way that we were not able to do even a couple of decades ago. But when these same digital technologies are applied to address the problems of people who are very poor, who have much less education, or who are politically powerless, it ultimately doesn't seem to help as much. What allows for this very diverse outcome with technology? I subscribe to a theory that I call the law of amplification, which says that, for the most part, technology amplifies whatever underlying human forces are already there. So if you have a good school that with good teachers and good administrators that is already executing on its mission, then you can take technology and it can actually help the school become better. On the other hand, if you have a dysfunctional organization or a corrupt government, then no amount of technology will turn that situation around. This also explains why in the Arab Spring we saw diverse outcomes with technology. In Egypt, where there were strong labor unions, strong trade organizations, and student groups, there was something for the technology to amplify. But in Saudi Arabia, where civil society has been squashed by the monarchy for several decades, there was no human institution that the technology could catch hold of. You might think that this is something that holds true in the developing world, but surely not in the developed world. Well, let's consider the situation in the United States with respect to education. Our Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, says that technology is a game changer in the field of education, a game changer that we desperately need both to increase achievement for all and to provide an equal education for everyone. But is this really happening? Rigorous scientific studies suggest that more technology in and of itself doesn't actually contribute to learning. One randomized controlled trial conducted in California showed that if you provide kids with laptops, they gain nothing in terms of their grade scores, test scores, disciplinary actions, or attendance compared with students who don't have laptops. So how could this possibly be? Well, if you think about it, anytime you look over the shoulder of a child with a smartphone or look over the child at a computer, what you most often find is that they are playing video games. They're not working math problem sets or writing extra composition papers for practice. I found this myself when I volunteered for a nonprofit organization in Seattle to help teach 3rd through 5th graders computer literacy skills. We had robotics classes, we teach the kids how to make their own YouTube videos, and so on. And ultimately what I found was that the biggest block to helping the kids learn about technology was the technology itself. As soon as my back was turned, they would look for video games to play either online or on the computer itself. And actually, increasingly, wiser, better educated parents know this. So a few years ago, I spent some time at Lakeside High School in Seattle. This is the high school that Bill Gates went to, and understandably, there's a lot of technology there. The kids tweet all of their sports team results, emails are sent between parents and teachers and students, and all of their assignments are online in some form or another. But what do the parents actually want when they believe that their children need an extra boost? Well, I was there as a tutor, and what the parents were paying for was my time attending to their children. Some of the children that I worked with were honors calculus students, and they didn't really need any substantial mathematical help, but they just wanted somebody to sound ideas off of. Some of my students had struggles with basic algebra and geometry, and what they really needed was a lot of math coaching. And in some cases, I had students who could do all of the work, but they just needed somebody to sit there and watch them go through it so that they would finish all of their assignments. In all of these cases, what I was providing was just adult guidance, and presumably that's what the parents understood to be of most value for their children's education as well. So if we know this increasingly as a society, it's a little bit strange that when we go to our tech company jobs, we are increasingly trying to push more technology into the schools of other people's children, as if the technology by itself somehow has beneficial impact. Next, let's consider inequality. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, is fond of saying that the richest 500 million people in the world have more wealth combined than the remaining 6 billion. and that the way we can fix that is by getting everyone online. That's the rationale behind his ambitious project, internet.org, where he's trying to get people who are currently not online access to the internet and to Facebook. But does technology actually address inequality in and of itself? Again, there are several reasons why we should question that. Consider, for example, massive open online courses, or MOOCs. Several years ago, they came on the scene with a conceit that they would provide a good college education for anybody who had access to the internet. And of course, in the United States, everybody has access to the internet through their public libraries. Well, several years later, we now have hard data that shows that the people who complete these courses online are primarily college-educated professionals with jobs, not high school dropouts who are looking for work. Why is this? Well, amplification explains that if you already have a good education and know how to learn on your own, then this kind of material can be of immense benefit. But if you've dropped out of high school and have doubts about your ability to learn, then no amount of information, however good it is online, is really going to help you learn. You need somebody to coach you and guide you through the experience. A more fun example occurs with Kickstarter. So several years ago, the famous actor and director Zach Braff ran a Kickstarter campaign in which he tried to raise money for an independent movie that he was making. He ultimately raised over $3 million. Meanwhile, the average Kickstarter campaign raises only about $6,000, and certainly not for everybody because many people don't make their Kickstarter goals. So this is an example that suggests that even though we have a platform that on the one hand allows anybody to fundraise for themselves, nevertheless fails to democratize the ultimate outcomes. In this case, somebody with incredible social influence and popularity is able to raise much more money than the average person. Finally, consider that over the last 4 decades, in the United States, we've seen all kinds of digital innovations. Of course, we've had the personal computer and the internet, and Google and Facebook have become household names. During the same period of time, though, the rate of poverty hasn't gone anywhere, inequality has skyrocketed, and social mobility on the whole has stagnated. So all of this is to say that during a golden age of digital innovation in the world's most technologically advanced country, we have not yet seen a significant dent in our most serious social ills. And what that tells you is that the technology by itself doesn't actually address deep social problems. Now, this is the point at which most technologists start to get a little bit depressed. And I am a computer scientist, so I understand that feeling very well. But I came out of the funk because I realized that there's also a positive side to technological amplification, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. Let's go back to the law of amplification. So if technology amplifies underlying human forces, in order for the technology itself to have positive impact, the most important thing is to get the human forces right. So what does this mean? Well, at the School of Information, fortunately, we don't just study technology in isolation, but we look at technology and how it connects with information and people. And people are really ultimately the drivers of what the information and the technology do. So let's consider the context of libraries. Most people think of libraries as just stacks of books and banks of computers, but of course, we know that that's not quite the case. A good library is basically the staff. It's the staff who decide to curate a particular collection, or they're the ones who help clients come in and actually get the value out of the computers that they want. So in all of these cases, what this shows is that it's the librarians that make a library strong, not the books themselves or the technology in and of itself. Or consider the situation with innovation and entrepreneurship. When I was in India, I often found that people would say, hey, we have this great IT sector. Can't we take the success of this sector and just spread it to the rural areas which really need economic help? Well, that's conflating correlation with cause if the goal is to take technology to rural areas and imagine that the technology will have some kind of impact. In Silicon Valley, of course, there's lots of technology, but nobody thinks that it's the technology that entrepreneurs use there that makes them who they are. If we were really interested in spreading the culture of entrepreneurship and innovation, then what we should be doing is training more people to be capable entrepreneurs and technology producers. It's not that people become great entrepreneurs by using the technology, it's rather that great entrepreneurs produce technology and the technology amplifies their desire to increase shareholder value. What about user experience design and human-computer interaction? Well, I think of UX designers and HCI researchers as the conscience of the technology industry. Engineers left to themselves have a tendency to build awesome technological artifacts for their own sake without thinking too much about how they ultimately impact people. But those of us who are concerned with human-centered design ultimately start and end with people. We are the ones who argue for the user in design meetings, and we're also the ones who think about impacts on non-users of technology as well. In fact, you could say that as people who worry about the impact of technology on people, we're the ones in a position to influence technology such that it doesn't contribute only to the bottom line, but also to making the world a better place. And with respect to making the world a better place, one final thought. If you think of technology as amplifying underlying human forces, then in a world of advanced technologies, it's all the more important that we get the human forces right. If you think of technology as a lever, then those of us who exist at the fulcrum between people and technology have an awesome privilege and a responsibility to ensure that the technology works to the advantage not only for ourselves, for our families, for our employers, but also for global society as a whole. Thank you.